This happened when I was around 9 years old. I'm 25 now, and it's something I'll never forget. It still gives me goosebumps to this day. I live in a terraced house, and my neighbors and I have our own little patio. There's a small road 10 meters from my yard where people do their Sunday walks on. Only a small fence separates my small yard and a patio from that road. I live in a pretty crowded area with several of these terraced houses spread around in my neighborhood. So seeing people walking on that road is pretty normal for me. Seeing random people standing on my patio is not. When I was 9, I usually got home from school about an hour before my mom got home from work. I lived maybe 50 meters away from my school, so my mom figured I was mature enough to be home alone. It was only an hour or so before she got home. So this one day, I got home from school. I did the usual thing, which was to make sure that I locked the front door and double check that the back door leading to the patio was also locked. Then I rushed up to my room upstairs to play as much PlayStation as possible before my mom came home and would make me do my homework. While playing, I heard this noise coming from outside my window. It was kind of like the sound of a cat, but my cat had been missing for over 3 months. Hope sparked within me, and I thought, oh my God, did he finally come back? I ran downstairs to check if it actually was my cat. The sight that met me gives me goosebumps again just writing this. There's a guy standing on my patio, a very tall man with black hair covering half of his eyes, making him look like a male version of the Ring Woman or something. I could hear him making this high-pitched sound, almost like a cat meowing. A brown liquid was running down from his mouth, and I could see him spitting out my dad's stomped cigarettes. He was actually eating from the ashtray. I was frozen, observing this. Eventually, I snapped out of it and screamed so loud that the man must have heard it. He didn't react, just kept eating from the ashtray outside. I ran upstairs to my room, locked the door, and called my mom, who then promptly called the cops. I've never been more terrified in my life. Laying in my bed, under my sheets, shivering with fear, as I continued to hear these high-pitched noises from that guy, eating cigarette stomps from the ashtray on my patio. Kind of blacked out for a moment, because the next thing I remember is the police arriving on the road by my yard. I hear them talking to the guy, saying stuff like, "Sir, what are you doing? Get over here or we will come down and arrest you," and so on. The man did not respond, but the high-pitched sounds was more frequent and got louder and louder. I then decided to look through the window, feeling safe that the cops were there now. I could see 2 police officers standing by my fence. I no longer saw the creepy man, however, because he was standing directly 1 story under me and out of my field of view. The police jumped the fence, and I remember hearing that creepy man screaming louder than I'd ever heard anything before. He charged the officer with full force, and he knocked the officer out cold. The male officer then immediately tased the guy, leaving him shaking on the ground, still screaming. The policeman struggled to keep him on the ground while putting handcuffs on him, but eventually he did. After a little while, he managed to wake up the police officer, who seemed to be badly hurt. He called for backup and an ambulance, and then he sees me standing in the window above him. The expression on my face must have been something else, because he just looked at me and said, "I sure hope you didn't see all that." Then I started to cry. By this time, neighbors started to arrive, wondering what the hell was going on. One of my neighbors, an elderly woman, made me come down. She took care of me until my mom came back home. The police then took the creepy guy with them in their car and left. But they promised they'd come back and talk to us about what had all happened. This is where my story takes an unexpected turn. The male police officer came back later that night and sat down with me and my mom to talk. He explained that the guy on my patio was actually diagnosed with severe autism. He had escaped from a facility where mentally challenged people lived. It was located around 5 kilometers where we lived. He explained that that guy had actually been living in my house 5 years ago, but then he'd been forced to move when his mom and his only caretaker died. Poor guy probably thought he was going to find his mom in my house. He missed the routines, and he missed living there with his mom. The police had to move him from the house that time 5 years ago, because he was extremely strong, and this was the reason he reacted the way he did when the police came that day. Still frightened, I told the police officer that they needed to make sure that this would never happen again, and he promised me that it wouldn't. After a few sleepless nights, my life kind of went back to normal, and the years went by and that man didn't come back. That was until 1 year ago. At this time, my mom and dad had moved out. I bought that house from them, and I'm still living there today. I was enjoying my morning coffee on the patio when I see this random guy stopping on the road by my fence. He just stood there, staring at me. I look at him and give him a nod, and then I hear it. Those same high-pitched noises. Holy shit. It's him. His hair had turned gray, but the high-pitched sounds made me realize who it was. My heart started racing, and I instantly remembered the reason why he was back. I realized that he must have managed to escape again, but because I kept my cool a bit longer than when I was 9, I started to realize how sorry I actually felt for the guy. 16 years later, and he was back to look for his mom. I decided to carefully ask him if he wanted to come down to the patio. He instantly jumped the fence. I started to think maybe he would knock me out like he did to that one police officer. He didn't. He just smiled. He looked at me and smiled. I offered for him to sit down, and he didn't respond. I offered for him to come inside, and he just started laughing. So we ended up going inside. His face lit up, pure joy. He was home. It reminded him of the life he had with his mother. It actually almost made me tear up. And all of a sudden, he sat down on my couch, turned on my TV, and switched directly to the cartoons. I sat and observed him for a while. He was just completely focused on them. I wanted him to just enjoy the moment, so I didn't say anything. I realized I had to call that facility and let them know what was going on. The caretakers arrived 10 minutes later. After a lot of convincing, he got back up, crying, and went back to the facility. I called the facility 2 days later, and we made a deal. His name is Tom, and I now consider Tom my friend. Every Sunday from the day he returned, Tom and his caretakers visit me to watch cartoons. They tell me it's the highlight of his week. It makes my heart warm. Now, for several years, my thoughts were, let's not meet guy on my patio eating from the ashtray. Now my thoughts are, let's meet every Sunday to watch cartoons with my friend, Tom. My parents started leaving me and my sisters home alone when I was around 13 or 14. Of course, the rule was to not let anyone we didn't know into the house. One night, there was a knock at the door. I went to the door and tried to look out, but I couldn't see anything. We couldn't pretend that we weren't there because the lights and the TV were both on. I opened the front door a crack, thinking that the person would be behind the screen door, but that wasn't the case. There was a man in his late 20s or early 30s just standing in our doorway. I shut the door quickly and told him to get behind the screen door. He obliged, and I cracked the door. Yes, I wasn't very smart, and latched the screen door. He told me a story about his vehicle breaking down the road and needed to use a phone. I said that I couldn't see his car, and he indicated that it was further down the road. Then I asked him why he walked past 2 houses right next door, and then walked to the one with no car in the driveway. And I could see that he was becoming agitated. Here's a general recollection of that conversation. Look, are you gonna let me use the phone or not? No, my dad is sleeping, and I can't let you go into his room to use the phone. Okay, just bring the phone here, and I'll use it then. I'm not letting you in the house. Just bring the phone to the door. It won't reach. Please leave. Okay. I shut the door and lock it. And while my sister and I are talking about how scary that was, the side door handle begins to jiggle. That same man knocked and says, "Hey, will it reach this door?" At this point, I tell him to go to the neighbor's house and use their phone. And he starts to yell, "I bet your dad's not even home. Let me in. I want to talk to him." I told him fine, I'll go get him. Then I went to my dad's room, got his shotgun, came out and racked it and said, "Here, meet my dad." The same man started cursing and calling me names, but he did leave. Or at least that's what I thought. He actually had gone around to another door and tried that one. Our dog, who was outside at the time, began barking at him. He proceeded to do something that made my dog yelp and cry out. I screamed out that I was calling the police, and he finally left. I felt really stupid for the entire interaction. I don't know if he was just a guy who needed a phone, but that whole experience was very creepy, and I was obviously ill-prepared for dealing with it at such a young age. This story happened to me back when I still lived at my parents' house. I was commuting to college at the time and had 3 siblings that also lived at home, my brother and 2 sisters. For some context, we lived on 5 acres in rural Ohio, surrounded on both sides by woods and farm fields. Additionally, during the week, my dad would normally leave for work around 2 a.m., so I always felt like it was my job to be the man of the house because he was gone during the times when you would imagine something sketchy happening. However, on this night, because it was the weekend, my dad was actually home. I woke up to the sound of my brother's voice trying to get my attention. We had separate rooms, but if you came out of our room, you could look down over the banister and see our front door. When I woke up, it took a few moments to get out of that haze and realize what was actually going on. I looked at the clock and it was around 2:30 a.m. My brother told me that there were 2 men at our front door. Now this really woke me up. We quietly walked out of my room to peek down and look down to the front door. When we looked, there was no one at the door, but I noticed my parents off to the side and out of view of the glass on that front door. I whispered down to my dad, and he told me that there were 2 guys who had been talking to one another and knocking at the door. Hearing my dad say this freaked me out even more. I went back into my room and grabbed my pistol, quickly shuffling down the stairs after looking to make sure that they were still not at the door. If they had been, they would have easily seen me coming down the stairs, as it's in direct view. My brother is right behind me as we head over to where my parents are, whispering to my parents to find out what was going on. Parents had awoken to the sound of our dog barking, only to find 2 men knocking loudly at the door. At this point, those 2 men returned and began knocking again. Despite the fact that no one had came to the door the first time, or that our dog was still actively barking at them, and also the fact that they were there at this time in the night, so late, and in a location where houses are spread out hundreds of yards away from each other. And again, knocking with the dog barking. It just made the situation even more terrifying. After a couple of minutes, the men walked away, and we all shuffled across the kitchen and into the family room to peek out those windows into our driveway. There was a black Cadillac sitting there, but no one was inside from what we could see. Immediately the question was, where did those guys go? They weren't in their car, and they were no longer at the front door. We would quickly get an answer to the question we just asked. All of a sudden, the handles to our back French door started jiggling, and they were actively trying to enter the back of our house, which entered into the kitchen. At this point, I just remember my mom frantically saying, "David," to my dad, as pure terror overwhelmed her. Then 2 things happened. Adrenaline filled my body as I prepared my handgun, horrified at the very real possibility that I might have to shoot these men. Secondly, my dad finally grabbed the phone and called the police and calmly told them what was happening. Thankfully, after a minute of jiggling, they stopped at the back door and disappeared once more, only soon to be back at the front door, knocking once again. After a few minutes, we suddenly saw the local police fly up in multiple cruisers with their lights turned on. As they whipped into our driveway and into our front yard, the 2 men bolted and attempted to run the long way around the house across the driveway. One of them disappeared out of view, but the other one was intercepted by an officer yelling for him to get on the ground. He didn't. He was immediately tased and fell. A few of the other officers went around the house after the other guy, and one of them came to talk to my dad and I as we came outside. They ended up finding the other man hiding in my sister's little playhouse in the backyard. It appeared that both of them were either drunk and or high, as the one who hid had cocaine on him. While they were both arrested that night, we never did find out what they were charged with or what happened to them. Needless to say, that whole experience wasn't fun. So to the random men at our door in the middle of the night, let's not meet again. My family and I used to live in a very rough neighborhood when I was a kid, around 7 years old. One night, it was just my mom, me, and my 2 siblings at home. My dad was on a business trip. Around midnight that night, someone began to knock on our door. My mom woke up, went to the front door and asked who it was. No answer. She thought maybe it was some kids playing ding dong ditch or something, so she just casually didn't think much of it and went back to bed. About 30 minutes later, someone began to knock again. This time, she got up and peered through the side window to see if she could catch anyone out there, but there was nobody there. She starts to worry, goes back to the room, grabs my dad's shotgun, and sits in the living room in the dark, just waiting. Sure enough, a few moments later, someone began knocking again. This time, my mom shouts at whoever it is that she's gonna call the cops, and if anyone tries to come inside, she would shoot them. Again, no response. My mom phoned the police, and around 2 a.m., they finally show up and do a quick search of the outside of our house while we all waited on the inside. After their search, they tell my mom that they'd found a piece of barbed wire about 4 feet long next to the front door, and they asked if it belonged to us. My mom told them that it wasn't hers and asked why. The police officer told her that it had to belong to whoever was knocking on the door then. He also told her he thinks that they were planning on strangling my mom with that barbed wire when she opened up the door to see who was knocking. Told her she was very smart to not open the door to see who's out there, otherwise it could have costed her life. They said they'd patrol the neighborhood until morning and do a thorough investigation once there was daylight outside. That next morning, as they were searching around the house, found footprints leading to the back of the house and leading up to my bedroom window. They'd also found nicks in the window seal, where they were trying to pry it open and break in, but had failed. Not long after that, we moved out of that house.
I worked at a 24/7 fast food restaurant a few years back when I was in college. The job wasn't fun or enjoyable in any way, and most of my coworkers were middle-aged people with no personalities. I was doing school online though, which meant I had more time to work, so I was cranking out 40 hours a week at least, and even got a promotion to shift lead after a few months. What I didn't realize when I took the promotion was that I was signing to officially be a full-time employee, which meant that they could make me work any shift. Not even a week into it, they put me as overnight, and I couldn't even argue it. Overnights were a pain in the ass because I'd be the only one there, so if the drive-thru got backed up, then I'd be hustling non-stop without any breaks. On the flip side though, sometimes it would be completely dead, and I'd just be standing around all night on my phone. This was one of those nights. I was in the back of the kitchen, sitting on a pile of boxes and scrolling through my phone, just trying to pass the time, when my headset rang to alert me that a customer was in the drive-thru. I got up and went to the computer, then asked what they would like to order. Nobody said anything, so I turned and looked up at the drive-thru camera, and the lane was empty. No cars in the drive-thru, or even in the parking lot around the restaurant. The system never really falsely beeps like that though. There was a slight storm outside, so I figured a raindrop or a flash of light must have tripped the sensor somehow. I stayed by the drive-thru window for a few minutes, and my headset beeped again. This time I quickly looked at the cameras and caught a man walking past the drive-thru lane. He was wearing a thick hoodie and a face covering, but quickly walked out of the camera's view. Where the restaurant was, there wasn't anywhere else he could have parked or walked from unless he was walking on the side of the main road. I watched the cameras to see if he'd come back, but after 10 minutes of no activity, I just went back to my phone. 15 more minutes went by before I got another beep, and when I checked the cameras, that same man was there, but this time he was standing in the drive-thru lane.
"Can I help you, sir?"
After a moment, he started reciting an order for a small meal. I wasn't supposed to serve people in the drive-thru unless they were in a vehicle, so I told him I couldn't accept his order. He stood there, letting the rain soak him as he just looked at the screen and didn't speak. I thought about telling him to leave, but I didn't want to escalate things if I didn't have to, so I just waited. After a minute, he started walking down the drive-thru lane toward the side of the restaurant where the window was. I rushed over and latched the window shut, and not even a second later, the man appeared outside. He had his hood and mask still on, but he looked to be in his late 40s and a dead look in his eyes. He watched me through the window and stood outside like he was waiting for me to talk to him. There was something about his look that really freaked me out and kept me from speaking. Then he softly said,
"Open up."
I nervously said no and just stayed where I was while the man continued looking at me. He asked again and knocked on the window, but after a few seconds, he turned, and as he walked away, a loud scraping sound ran along the side of the building. I checked the cameras to make sure he left, and luckily, he didn't come back. During the next hour of my shift, though, I was thinking about that scraping sound. I decided to take out the trash to the dumpster and take a quick look. On the side of the wall, under the drive-thru window, was a long scratch, looking like it was made from a knife, dragging along the building. I called the police after that, but the man couldn't be identified from the grainy camera footage, mixed with the heavy rain and fog. The man never turned up, and I'll never know exactly what he was planning on doing that night. But seeing as he had a knife ready in his hand, I assumed that if I had taken his order and opened that window, then that would have been the last thing I would have ever done.
Our official merch store is finally here. If you want to support more of our channel, check out our merch shop. The link is in the description down below. See you on the next video.